I'm Kelly Worthman in the CBSN Denver studio. If you're like most Coloradans, you love enjoying all of the outdoor activities our state has to offer. Well, now those activities are being highlighted in a brand new podcast from Colorado Parks and Wildlife. It's called Colorado Outdoors. And joining me now is Jason Clay, Public Information Officer for CPW. Jason, of course, we thank you for being with us. This podcast recently launched, so tell us a little bit more about it and why CPW chose to do a podcast.
Well, it's a podcast that really has endless opportunities for us and the number of subjects that we can touch on, which is kind of the fun part about it. I think it was an avenue that we wanted to get into because it is a way that we can tell the story of what's going on across Colorado in a lot of our outdoor spaces. And you know, Colorado, so much of the fabric of it is the outdoors. So it allows us to talk to Coloradans in a new form and an extended form. A lot of your social media are ways that you communicate or digest information now can be in a condensed form, or a podcast is one where you can kind of go into a little more detail, and one that people can listen to, as they have free time.
Well, and one of the episodes I know recently focused on our historic wildfires, at least the fires that we've seen, especially this year, and the impact that has on our wildlife. So what can listeners learn from an episode like this?
Well, it gives you a good opportunity to hear the various effects that go with a wildfire as it relates to wildlife. One area that may get lost or people may not think about is the aquatic life that gets impacted down the road because of wildfires if a lot of that sediment reaches into our streams and rivers. And we hear from one of our forest habitat coordinators. So very interesting stuff. They draw on previous experiences. They talk about the Hayman Fire back in the early 2000s and what they learned from that experience. And we even get into a little bit of what we know now from the fires that happened this summer. Mortality is talked about, how animals use their instinct. Animals have survived fire for thousands of years. But it was really interesting, and it was sparked by a lot of questions that we receive from the public that want to know what's happening to wildlife during these wildfires. So that's a fun part about our podcast too, is if we get lots of questions and people want to know about something that, maybe we can gear an episode towards that.
Well, I know a lot of people are going to have questions about the reintroduction of gray wolves, another hot topic, of course, here in Colorado with the passing of Proposition 114. So do you anticipate an episode on this issue?
I would imagine at some point we will. We don't have one on the docket as we speak right now, but it was a tightly contested ballot measure, and our process now will be to work with our Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission. And I know people will want to hear about what that process is going to entail. So, I'd imagine at some point that will probably be an episode that we discuss.
And, Jason, we said it at the top of this interview that, if you're Coloradan, you enjoy the outdoors. But this podcast, I imagine, is also geared towards tourists as well, everything that they can learn when they're visiting our state, right?
Absolutely. It's with a podcast, you can consume it from wherever, and so many people not only are moving to our state, but come to visit our state for the great outdoor recreational opportunities that there are. So, some of the podcasts, it can be educational and informative, but it can also be something that can inspire people. If you like the outdoors, or if you like these types of activities, and we do an episode on that, maybe it sparks the interest of someone.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's get right to it then. Where can people find the CPW podcast?
So you can find the Colorado Outdoors podcast on any of your favorite podcast platforms: iHeartMedia, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, you name them. It's on there. It can also be found online as well.
All right. Well, Jason, I'll be adding it to my podcast library list here soon. Thank you so much
Excellent.
for being with us. Yeah, of course. And of course, we will put all this information about Colorado Outdoors, about the podcast, on our website, cbsdenver.com. We'll be